massive live, one world nation, true clear channel with rhythm and information. Internet connect network, virus stations, media free, underground communication.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate you guys showing up. I know when I was your age at this point on a Monday night, I probably my third beer by about now, so I do understand that people coming out to hear an economics lecture is not something that everybody does, so I appreciate that. What I'm going to do just with these talks, I'll go for, I don't know, 40, 45 minutes or so and get my, lay out the different viewpoints and so forth, and then I'll turn it over to your guys' questions. What I'm supposed to be talking about, of course, is the difference between capitalism and what's often called corporatism, or if you wanted to use a really provocative term, fascism. And you may have seen, they showed me some of the posters they were hanging up, and that was the reason for some of those, the ones with the swastikas. What is fascism? Well, that's the terms of the dictionary definition. It means an institution or an arrangement where the government allows people to maintain nominally their private ownership, but it's heavily regulated. So you're doing what the state wants you to do with your property. All right, so that I want to distinguish from what I mean by capitalism. So at the outset, let me just make sure we're not just having a disagreement over labels, because I know there are some people, and maybe some people in this room, that for them, the very term capitalism means a system where powerful, rich people go to the government and they get certain privileges that are backed up through government force, whether subsidies, outright subsidies, or whether there's favorable regulatory treatment so that like the little mom and pop shops are at a disadvantage relative to the big corporations, or of course this happens more often in foreign countries where you have things that are either literally or very close to slave labor, where there's tyrannical regimes and they have policies in place that really make it or induce their people to go work in factories, for example, that it's not really a free choice, it's that the government sets up policies. Okay, so for a lot of people, that's what they mean by capitalism. Right? So if that's what you mean by that word, well then I'm not here to defend capitalism. Right? I would oppose that too. And you could use alternate terms. I'd say, well, I'm for the free market, or I'm for laissez-faire, I'm for government not picking winners and losers in business. Okay, so I guess all I'm saying right now at the outset is let's not get caught up in just terms of the labels, that if what we mean by that word capitalism is a system, like I said, where the government is picking winners and losers, often giving advantages to the rich because they're the ones who usually control the government behind closed doors, well then obviously I'm not for that system. That's not what I'm here to talk about. Another sort of caveat that I want to dispose of first of all is that there are plenty of people who say they're for capitalism and they use the rhetoric meaning a free market, meaning a system where everyone's free to open a business and they keep the profits if they succeed and they go out of business if they lose. And a lot of people champion that system, but then when push comes to shove, they're actually really not for that. Okay? And there's a lot of Republican politicians in particular that are guilty of that. Right? So again, I just want to acknowledge that there are plenty of people who will say they're for the types of things I'm talking about, but then in practice, they're really not. And all I can say on that score is that a lot of the Austrian economists, and who also would describe themselves as libertarians, in that video, for example, the guy Hayek, the one that was bald with glasses just like that I had, or maybe he didn't have glasses, but he was definitely bald. That's the school of thought of which I'm a member, and I'll talk a little bit in the talk today about what they believe in or what their economic theories are. So as I want to say is that we at least can credibly say we were against the Republicans when they were doing this stuff too. Okay, so this is not, or it need not be a partisan issue, even though I am acknowledging that there are some people that, for example, are really against deficits and big government when it's Obama in office, but yet these same people weren't saying anything when George Bush was the one running huge deficits, and they were against the bailout of the banks. Now that it's Timothy Geithner in charge of it, but they weren't really screaming bloody murder when it was Henry Paulson, who was Bush's Treasury Secretary. Okay, so there are hypocrites who would make the same kind of arguments I'm making tonight when it's Democrats who are in office, but they didn't say on the other hand when it was Republicans. At the very least, like I say, I am on record. I can point you guys afterwards if people are curious about my online articles opposing George Bush's deficits and so forth. So, as I say, when I talk about capitalism, I have in mind a free market system. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. And even though there are plenty of people who say they're for the free market, when in practice they flip-flop depending on who's in office, have been a group of people in the United States that have been pretty consistent about this. And again, they would describe themselves as what's called Austrian economists, and they would usually describe themselves as libertarian politically. So in terms of famous public figures, Ron Paul would be the most visible one of the sorts of ideas I'm talking about. And obviously, the people here part of this club know who he is. Another guy would be Peter Schiff. In terms of the economics, if you're familiar with that name, he was an investment manager who called the housing boom fairly early on. People on CNBC were making fun of him, and he was subscribing to the Austrian theory. Okay, so how do we distinguish between capitalism and corporatism? Well, let me first describe to you what the Austrians, why they think the housing bubble happened. And I think that will help us be able to distinguish between the two approaches. All right, because there's this train of thought that is kicked in, and it actually was, there was a battle when the financial crisis really hit hard in the fall of 2008. There was a sort of battle in the blogosphere and the newspaper op-eds over the narrative. Okay, and I was a participant in that, and I'll be frank with you guys, it was those of us who believe in the free market and laissez-faire capitalism, the market economy. We were trying hard to sort of codify the history and say, okay, the lesson from this is that big government regulation, Federal Reserve manipulation of the money supply doesn't work, and that it leads to disaster. Whereas the people who were proponents of big government, whether you want to call them either liberals in the modern American sense, or leftists, or interventionists, whatever term you want to use, progressives is how they often call themselves, they of course were trying to capture the narrative and have the history beat go down as the fact that George Bush and the Republicans stupidly rolled back regulations that had been in place since the New Deal. It gave us this unregulated housing bubble, and then the greedy Wall Street bankers were very short-sighted, concerned about short-term profits, and it blew up in their face. And then the rich, as always happens, go to the government and get bailed out from their mistakes. Okay, so that was their narrative. That was the narrative they were trying to codify. So unfortunately, for those of you who share my perspective, we lost. Okay, it was actually up in the air for a while. It wasn't clear which way it was going to go, but then the self-styled progressives, they managed to win the narrative. Right? They just overwhelmed us, and that's now how most people talk about what happened. So let me at least give the perspective that I still think is the more accurate one, and explain why I don't think it was unregulated laissez-faire that led to the housing bubble. So for one thing, just on the face of it, it's a little bit crazy to call George Bush a free market guy, even though that's the mantle he wants to hold for himself. Just on the face of it, what did he do? He ran huge deficits. He ran up government spending, and not even just in matters of foreign policy. Right? So even because I know there's a lot of Republican conservatives that say they're for small government, they're fans of George Bush, and you point out, well, look at the deficits that happened under him when he had control of the whole Congress. If the Republicans weren't going to shrink government then, when do you think they're going to do it? You point this thing out, a lot of diehard Republicans would say, oh, well, 9/11, he had to go fight the war on terrorism, give the guy a break. But even if you just look at domestic spending, things what he did with medical entitlements and so forth, government grew faster under him than it did under Bill Clinton. All right, so under various measures you can use. So on the face of it, George Bush was certainly not this small government laissez-faire guy. Just another metric you could use. The funding for the SEC went way up under the Bush administration. It went up more under him than it did under Bill Clinton. I'm pretty sure Jimmy Carter as well. Okay, so because remember, at the beginning of his administration, the Enron scandal happened. Just making sure you guys are paying attention.
Wow, what was
We need
that?
more regulation in here. So that's, all right, so funding for the SEC went up under George Bush, like I say, at a faster rate than under Bill Clinton, I'm pretty sure under Jimmy Carter too. And the political rationale for that, why did that happen again? Because that Enron scandal and the MCI and WorldCom, remember all that stuff happened early on. And so that, what does Congress do? Oh, well, so the SEC screwed up, let all this stuff happen, so what's the solution? Well, the SEC needs more money, right? Typical response when a government agency fails to do its job, it gets more money. So that's what happened under Bush. Now, don't misunderstand, I'm not saying, therefore, the government must have been doing a good job regulating the financial sector because look, it had bigger budgets. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is this notion that George Bush was this wild man hacking at the government is wrong. We're just looking at the numbers. Beyond that, at the end of his administration, what did he do? He literally nationalized or partially nationalized the banks. Okay, so if some South American dictator had done that, that there was a financial crisis and the government in some South American country took ownership in huge banks, Republican conservatives in the United States probably wouldn't be pointing at that guy and saying, oh, he's a champion of the free market. No, they'd be going nuts saying he's a socialist or a fascist and we should probably start bombing his country, right? But when George Bush does it, oh no, that's okay, he's a free market guy. So again, all I'm saying is George Bush is no friend of the free market, and so people who are not really partisan but are just interested in these things from an ideological perspective, all I'm saying is don't take what happened under the Bush administration as evidence of this is what free market laissez-faire capitalism gives you. Right? That would be as inaccurate as a pacifist, for example, being blamed for what happens under the Obama administration. Because there are right-wingers who would say, hey, we tried peace, we tried not intervening in foreign affairs. Obama went around apologizing to all these countries and look at what it got us. When, of course, the Obama administration is ramping up military actions. Okay, so my point is just the rhetoric that mainstream politicians use to curry favor with their base doesn't translate into practice what they do in office. Right? So the same token that really Barack Obama is not putting pacifism or humble foreign policy to the test, by the same token, the Bush administration was not an implementation of a laissez-faire response to a financial panic. Okay, so there's, maybe in the Q&A some of you want to get this. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty in these opening remarks about the specific alleged deregulation. But I just want to focus on one major area where we clearly did not have a free market, and that's the central thing that Austrian economists point to when it comes to the causes of the financial bubble, the bubble in the housing market and on Wall Street. And that would be the Federal Reserve. All right, so here, this is clearly not an institution that is of the free market. I don't know if you guys saw this, but Jon Stewart really hit the nail on the head when he had Alan Greenspan, who was the chairman of the Fed before Ben Bernanke. I don't remember which year it was, but Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, had Greenspan on his desk, and we get a great question early on. He said, so Mr. Greenspan, why do we have a Fed? Why does there need to be someone like you who picks interest rates? That I thought we had a free market in this country, and then why wouldn't supply and demand determine what the interest rate is? Why does there have to be a group of government officials sitting around in a room deciding what the interest rate ought to be? Okay, and Greenspan gave him some evasive non-answer as he was practiced at doing, but it was really a brilliant question. It's the kind of thing that it would take someone like Jon Stewart to ask because he's not trained in these areas and he doesn't know that, oh, that's not really a question you're supposed to ask. That's, you want to ask some real wonkish question. He asked this really fundamental question. So again, we sort of take it for granted. Maybe some of you have never thought about that, but if you just think about it, it would be really weird if you had an institution that just set the price of milk, for example. That you had a government appointed official who was in charge of the milk industry and determined, well, we think the price of a gallon of milk this week is a little bit too high, and so we're going to cut it by 10 cents, right? And then that would be milk policy or something, the chief lactation officer. Well, I don't know. that sounds kind of dirty. All right. So you see what I'm saying? That you don't have these sorts of things. That would be crazy. And if they did have something like that, you can just imagine if President Obama proposed the creation of such an agency, people, on the